Hey young friends, Dr. Bill here. I'm so glad to be back with you and so glad that we have a chance to do another lesson together. You may recall that the last time we met, we began talking about King David. And we began our conversation about David by recounting how David was anointed to be the next king after Saul. The prophet Samuel went to David's father's house. David's father was named Jesse. He had sons, and Jesse paraded all of his sons before the prophet. And Samuel said each time one of those sons came before him, he said, "This is not the one. This is not the one." And finally he asked Jesse if he had any more sons, and Jesse said, "Well, there's the youngest. He's out tending sheep." And Samuel said, "Bring him." And so they went and fetched David, brought him in from the field, from tending the sheep, and as soon as he walked in, God said to Samuel, "This is the one." And so Samuel anointed David so that he would be the next king of Israel after King Saul. As well, you may remember that we talked about one of the most important parts of David's life, how he used to go and bring food to his brothers while they were out fighting the Philistines under the leadership of King Saul. There was a giant amongst the Philistines, a man named Goliath, and every day he would come out between where the Philistines were and where the Hebrew people were, and he would say, "Who will come out and fight with me? You know, if that person comes and I win the battle, then you are defeated. But if that person kills me, then you win." And no one was willing to take Goliath up on his challenge. Not even King Saul. Well, as the story goes, David was quite offended to hear that Goliath had made this challenge, and he was upset that no one was willing to do battle with him. So David went and did battle with Goliath using the tools that he knew best, a slingshot and some stones. And he killed Goliath, and from then on, the Israelites, the Hebrew people, were able to conquer the Philistines at that particular time. Well, as a result of killing Goliath, David became very, very popular. The people admired him. They celebrated him. They talked about how great David was. And as a result of this, King Saul became very jealous and very angry with David. He became so angry and so jealous that Saul thought that David was a threat to him. And so he began to make plans to kill David. And so what we find in the rest of the book of 1 Samuel is that David learns that Saul is out to kill him, and David travels all over from one place to another trying to escape Saul's intent to kill him, trying to get away from Saul and preserve and save his own life. Well, there's on one occasion during all of this travel, that Saul unknowingly camped very near to the place where David and his men were hiding. And so David, trying to make peace with Saul, snuck into Saul's camp. And there he presented himself to King Saul and said, "Look, everyone is telling you that I'm trying to kill you, but here I am. I have my sword. You are unarmed. I could kill you right now, but I refuse to. You are the Lord's anointed." And so with that, David withdrew. But even with that, Saul was still angry and jealous and still wanted to find a way to kill King David. So what we learn near the end of the book of 1 Samuel is that Saul went out and did battle again with the Philistines, and this time the Philistines won. They killed Saul, and they killed all 3 of his sons. And so as a result of that, the stage was set for David to become king. And that's what we'll talk about in our lesson next week. But I think there's some important aspects of David's story here that are important for us. There's some life lessons that we can learn by paying attention to this part of his story. The first is that jealousy and anger, hatred and envy, those things can hurt us when we allow them to take control of our lives. Saul was so jealous, so angry, so full of hatred toward David that he lost his sense about what was important. And so instead of defending the Hebrew people, instead of trying to lead them and do right by them, Saul was consumed with trying to kill David. As I said, he spent more time trying to kill David than he did trying to protect his own people. And what that shows us is that sometimes, if we allow it to happen, our emotions can get the best of us, and it will lead us to do things that are not right, or we'll lose sight of our priorities. Now, sure, there are all times when we are jealous. Maybe we look at someone and we just don't like them, or we think bad things about them, and maybe we just say, I'd like to not take them down a notch. I just like to, bring them more down to my level. And that's pretty normal to have those kinds of feelings and emotions. But if we let them grow within us and get bigger and bigger, they can soon become the most important things in our lives. And those emotions of jealousy and hatred, they can drive us, and we can lose sight of what's really and truly important in life. We can get off track. We can lose sight of our bigger and larger goal. So that's what we learn from David's encounter with Saul. Saul lost his priorities because he was consumed with anger and hatred toward David. As well, this story underscores the importance of having and keeping friends. David had good friends. In fact, his very, very best friend was one of Saul's sons, a man named Jonathan. Jonathan and David hit it off immediately. And therefore, Jonathan, knowing how quick it was for King Saul to fly into fits of rage and begin to want to kill David again and again, well, Jonathan would tip David off and let him know, hey, King Saul is on one of his things, and he's going to come after you again to try to kill you. And that gave David time to get away. Jonathan was a good friend. He tried to protect him. As well, David was surrounded by a group of men, some soldiers, and they were loyal to David. And they decided that they were going to stay with David and do whatever it took to keep him safe. So David was surrounded by very, very good friends. Now, you're at the age where you have lots of friends. Maybe even say, I have a best friend. Well, that's really, really cool, and that's very, very important. But one of the things that happens as we all grow older is that our circle of friends may get a little smaller. And the number of people that we can say are our really, really good friends, our best friends, well, that number gets even smaller. But I want to tell you that there are few things more important in life than having good friends. People that you can count on when you're in need, when you're hurting, or when you simply need someone to come and stand with you. Keeping and having good friends, that is one of the best things that we can do for ourselves in life. And David shows us that he was a good friend maker. David had the gift of making friends. And as the book of 1 Samuel and even 2 Samuel tells us, David knew when to rely on his friends, and they also knew when they could rely on David, keeping and making good friends. And then the final thing is that David chose not to kill Saul when he had the opportunity. Don't you think that after being chased around all over the place by King Saul and his army, that eventually David would just get tired of this and say, heck, I'm done with this. I'm just going to go find Saul and I'm going to kill him myself and be done with all this. Well, David refused to take advantage of Saul. He refused to move things ahead more quickly than they should have gone. David recognized that he would become king in God's good time, and he did not need to force the issue. So David decided when he had the opportunity that he wouldn't kill Saul. And by this, David showed that he trusted God. He trusted that God would bring forth everything that God had promised him. That when David, as a much younger person, had been anointed to be king, David trusted that in the right time and at the right moment, that would happen. He didn't need to try to hurry God's work along. He didn't need to try to do anything to make God work faster and bring something about. He was willing to be patient and to let things unfold as they should and in their own time. That's an important lesson for us to learn as well. It is hard to trust God. I mean, there are lots of times where we're waiting on God to act and we can become so impatient. We can be in such a big hurry that we don't allow God time to work things out and to work according to God's timetable. Well, David learned that lesson, and that's something we can learn from David, that one of the most important things is to wait for God and to give God time. Well, that's it for this week's study of big names in the Bible. Next week, we'll continue with another lesson from King David's life. And in the meantime, as always, I wish you well. Hope you're having a great week, and I look forward to seeing you the next time we get together. Take care. Bye-bye.